Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Naima Hall, and I am also here with my colleague, Dr. Deborah Blair, and we are the directors of the STHM Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We'd like to welcome you to the March edition of Diversity Speaks, a discussion platform that was specifically designed for our students and alumni communities. As we near the conclusion of Women's History Month, today we wrap up our series of events with a collaborative conversation between our Minority Alumni Coalition and our very special guest, Valerie Ferguson, who is Regional Manager of Disney Deluxe Resorts. Now, before we get into all of the formal introductions and housekeeping, I do want to share that we've entitled today's talk, Breaking Molds and Shattering Glass Ceilings, where we hope to discuss the journey of a powerhouse or a powerhouse of women that sit at the intersection of multiple identities and minorities within industry. And we're going to learn about their experiences, their hardships, and their triumphs. Now, before we get started, I'm going to ask Ms. Elena Billings to go over a few housekeeping items.
Thanks, Naima, and thank you to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the MAC for hosting today's webinar. The STHM Alumni Association's Minority Alumni Coalition, or the MAC, was founded in 2019 by 3 STHM alumni, Janelle Biko, Johanna Best, and Zachary James. Since then, MAC members have dedicated their time to supporting students through educational programming and engaging fellow alumni in volunteer opportunities. Today's collaboration between ODEI and the MAC is very exciting as we hear about the journeys of powerhouse women in the hospitality and sports industries and discuss the experiences, hardships, and triumphs that come with being considered a double minority. Before we get started, I do have a few notes to share with you. First, please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions throughout the webinar. We otherwise ask that you please keep your microphones muted during the session. Second, today's webinar is being recorded so it can be shared on our STHM Connections platform and the like. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Naima to introduce today's keynote speaker.
And without further ado, I want to take space and opportunity to introduce our special guest for today, Valerie Ferguson. Valerie is a leader within the hospitality and tourism industry and is a pioneering minority female that paved her own way to the C-suite within industry. Valerie began her Disney career in 2016 as a director of lodging, where she was responsible for the strategic development of products and services for Disney Parks and Resorts' global hotel portfolio. Valerie has been a prolific leader in the hospitality and tourism industry across the country. She, in the past, was the chairman of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, where she has spearheaded the Opportunity of a Lifetime, a campaign organized to promote hospitality careers throughout the United States. She has enjoyed a legendary hospitality career across multiple disciplines, including operations, brand management, and sales and marketing. In senior leadership roles, she also held within Lowe's Hotel Corporations, also at the Ritz-Carlton, and also the Hyatt Hotels Corporation. So without further ado, let's open up this dialogue with Valerie and tell us a little bit about your journey, your experience. I'm sure I haven't done your introduction due justice.
A graduate, postgraduate curriculum at the Emory School of Law in Atlanta, Georgia, thinking that I could move to Atlanta, graduate from law school, become a rich and famous entertainment lawyer, and then move back to Sausalito, move back to San Francisco and buy a house in Sausalito and, you know, have this incredible life. That still has not happened. I got to Atlanta and, you know, it was different, particularly in the late 70s. It was very much a black and white city. I was really thrilled that I was in a city that was 50% African American, because coming from San Francisco, where it's like 1%, I was just thrilled at that. But they didn't have a beach. I didn't look at a map and see that Georgia is inland. Everything was fried. It was, you know, fried green tomatoes, fried okra chicken, fried steak, fried chicken. I'm like, where are my Mexican restaurants? Where are my Indian restaurants? Where's my lumpia? What? You know, I didn't realize at the time in my early 20s how close-minded I really was. I came from this environment that was extremely diverse, but wasn't ready to open up to anything else. And so I decided I wasn't going to go to law school there. I really needed to get a job, save some money, and move back home because I was off the gravy train. So I thought I'll give it a year. By that time, I'll reapply to law school. I'll go to Bolt Hall. I'll be in good shape. Well, I took a job as a night auditor at the Hyatt Regency Atlanta. And all of a sudden was starting to enjoy Atlanta, and I loved the job. It gave me an independence at a very young age because not that many people are around. After 11 p.m. from a management standpoint, so I was able to make a lot of decisions. And I just learned, I just gravitated toward it. And before I knew it, I started getting promoted. And I kept thinking, well, we'll see how far this goes. I ended up with Hyatt Hotels for 18 years. I opened a number of hotels throughout the United States, 12 hotels to be exact with Hyatt, and managed 4 hotels, eventually coming back to the hotel that I had started out as the general manager. From there, I went to Ritz-Carlton, where I was the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta for 4 years. And as you stated, was chairman of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, met Jonathan Tisch, who then gave me the opportunity of a lifetime as a regional vice president responsible for the Northeast sector of the company. And I was overseeing 5 hotels, as well as opening what is now the Loews Philadelphia Hotel. So, I've had an incredible career. All 3 of those stops brought me here to Disney, where I joined in a global capacity and then was later promoted to regional general manager responsible for our 10 deluxe hotels here on campus. I can't tell you, there hasn't been a day that I have not enjoyed in this industry. Every day is different. It's still an industry that is filled with institutionalized racism that we've got to overcome. We see that through the fact that there's still this absence of leadership held by people of color. When you start to look at the corporate offices, when you start to think about the number of Black and Brown general managers, the number of Asian general managers, these are in the 2 digits, 20, 30, there's less than 50 Black general managers still today. So I take it upon myself to make sure I'm making that awareness known, and that I'm actively working to change that. When I was promoted to my first hotel's general manager in 1985, I was the first African-American female to take on that position. And prior to me, there were 2 other African-American males that were managing hotels. You would think, 30 years later, we'd be in a much better position. But when you think about how the industry has grown, and how diverse in product the industry is today, we'd be further along. So there is a intense effort now that we have to take as people of color, and the industry is trying to take now to really see a significant increase in people of color in our leadership positions.
Valerie, you actually brought up a really great point where you talk about the institutionalized racism and the conscious efforts that industry has to take to offset the systems that have unfortunately been put in place to limit individuals of color from reaching that C-suite. So could you tell us a little bit about how, or did you hit a glass ceiling within your career? And if you did, how did you recognize that this was a glass ceiling and you need to break through it?
Yeah, I think I recognized it when I was with Ritz-Carlton. This was a company I had joined because a lot of the leaders of that company were leaders I had worked for previously at Hyatt. So I wasn't really changing cultures. I was just, changing brands and learning the luxury side of the business. And that was something I was really was intentional on my part. I had been with the company for about 3.5 years, and I just didn't see myself becoming a regional vice president. And I felt that that was the next step. I had managed 4 hotels for Hyatt. I was willing to take the 1 step back, to take 2 steps forward. But I felt the environment I was in wasn't going to allow for that. And so when the opportunity presented itself, I jumped. And, I was with Lowe's hotels, for another 18 years, and it really served me well. I don't regret any of the moves, but, I would always advise that if you don't see it happening within the organization that you're in and you want to continue to grow, then sometimes you've got to take that knowledge and allow it to benefit that company that's going to benefit you. The company that's going to allow you to grow, that's going to allow you to learn, that's going to allow you to fail, and to allow you to succeed.
That's a very difficult strategy to employ when you're within industry, because it can be scary and it can be risky. And then you recognize that there's ongoing barriers that you will face when you are at the intersection of gender, identity, ethnicity, all of these things that are unique to individuals. So I'm curious, as you use this strategy, is there anything or any advice that you would give to women that are within the early parts of their careers and starting to experience that glass ceiling outside of, look, take the risk, you might have to jump, you might have to leave you're not shattering the glass ceiling, you're almost just getting away from it and going into another organization so that you can try to bypass it. But any advice that you can give outside of the strategy that you use for early career practitioners or professionals?
Well, the environment has changed significantly today. I think we are in, a time where social injustice is visible to our white brothers and sisters. And, what happened this summer, happened because there was this thing called an iPhone. While the event still happened early in my career, no one knew that. And so as an African American, everything is fine. You're the one that has to make the change. You're the one that has to constantly be uncomfortable. You're the one that has to allay everybody's fears. In today's environment, companies realize that there is a problem with racism. They also realize that there's a problem with institutionalized racism, and many companies are leaning in on that. So if I were starting today, one, I would take advantage of this opportunity that there are companies looking for you. They're looking for women. They're looking for women of color. They're looking for men of color. Take advantage of this moment by being prepared. Understand your own strengths and understand your weaknesses. You'll never, be the strongest in those weaknesses. So just know who they are so you know where you need to resource assistance and support, but be prepared. When a company takes you on, they're taking you on, particularly in today's environment, because they need your perspective and they need your point of view. There will always be those in the room that will use code words like, oh, you're intimidating, or, they'll talk over you, or they'll make you feel as a young person coming in that you don't have a seat at the table. We're on Zoom right now, so everybody's, has equity in where they're placed. But once we come out of this and you're back on property, what does that feel like when you go into a conference room? Where are you sitting? Where are you physically sitting? So many times I've been to meetings where I see women or people of color, going to the back of the room or sitting at the chairs that are around the table. You got in the room first, sit at the table. Come to the table, make sure your voice is heard. It's hard because for women that are going into all male surroundings. For me, it was hard because my voice sounds different, and here I am, I look different. In today's environment, they're going to be expecting that difference to present itself. Be wary of those that want to speak over you. Let them have their space, and then step up to the plate. Your point of view is valued. Your point of view matters. And guess what? You're going to say the wrong thing. That's going to happen. So does everybody else. We learn from our mistakes. It's okay. We have a habit of thinking that we have to check every single box, that we have to be perfect. You know what? I can tell you, white males don't check every single box. They just walk through the door. It's time for us, walk through the door and know that you've got the core competencies to be successful. You will continue to learn, but be prepared. Study, read, stay on top of your craft, and bring that to the table.
Excellent. And Valerie, before we open this up to our panelists, I will say that oftentimes when we speak of this term of a glass ceiling, from those who come from a position of privilege, it's just a perception, right? It's not necessarily a lived experience. But what is the responsibility, do you think, is of women to better support their other fellow women in the workplace to help minimize the impact of hitting the glass ceiling? And how do we become better allies within our strive or pathway for leadership?
Well, I mean, it goes without saying that we need to support one another. I think that, I come out of probably that second generation of women that started to say, okay, I want a seat at the table. Women in that first generation and many in my generation simply didn't know how to mentor because they weren't really mentored. Some of them were. As my career progressed, I had mentors. And guess what? That taught me how to be a mentor. We have to break out of this that, you can pull yourself up from your own bootstrap. Nobody's ever done that. There's always been somebody to open a door. A door was opened for me. I have an obligation to do the same thing and to recognize talent and allow that person to meet their potential, support that individual, that woman in meeting their potential. On the other side, be accepting of the critique. Excuse me, sorry, got phones ringing. Be accepting of critique. It's an invitation, not an indictment. Sometimes we think that when people are critiquing our work, that it's a negative. I learned from those critiques. I learned from feedback. Now, if someone is speaking to you in a disrespectful manner, that's not feedback. If someone is questioning your ability and your grasp, that's not feedback. But taking a document you've written and just, and going through it and saying, hey, let me walk you through this. Tell me what your intention was. Let me try to help you. That's feedback. And sometimes we can get a little defensive. When you do that, you've just turned off an important channel of success because that is support. So I believe strongly that we have an obligation and a responsibility to make sure there are more women and more people of color moving up the ranks. We're working on that right now at the company I'm with, and I'm really proud of the work that we're doing because we're being very intentional.
Excellent.
That's what I expect out of all of corporate America today.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Valerie. That is phenomenal insight that you're providing to us. Now let's have a more inclusive dialogue. Let's bring in our alumni panelists that are a part of the Minority Alumni Coalition, and let's ask a few questions. So I'll have you all introduce yourself really quickly with your pitch and just kind of tell us what your name is, your role in your year, and what you graduated from STHM. So let's start with Christine.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christine Khor, and I'm a two-time STHM graduate. So I graduated in 2014 and then 2018. So I studied tourism and hospitality management with a marketing concentration. Since then, I kind of took a slight detour. And now I'm working in the FMCG industry, which is the fast moving consumer goods. So I work for TSNR Group as the trade marketing manager here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Wonderful. Let's go on to Lorena.
Hi, my name is Lorena Morel Diaz. I'm a graduate from 2012 School of Tourism and Hospitality Management. I'm currently the Director of Operation for Frontdesk, a short-term rental company that manages suites, apartments all across the United States, and currently oversees strategy, growth, and people management for the company.
Excellent. Thank you, Lorena. Let's move on to Kendra.
Thanks, Naima. I'm Kendra Plummer, a 2013 graduate of the Tourism and Hospitality track. Currently, I'm the founding partner of Elise Capital, which is a hotel investment firm unlocking access to hotel opportunities for women and minorities specifically.
And last but not least, let's move on to Gabrielle. Gabrielle, sorry, I keep pronouncing your name correctly.
No worries. Hi, everyone. Gabrielle Salomon, class of 2016 on the sport and recreation side. I'm currently finishing up my doctorate in the UK, looking at diversity, equality, inclusion work in professional soccer. Also the founder for the Alliance for Diversity, Equality, Inclusion in Sport, which is a new group that I'm establishing through an award that I got through Temple. And more recently, I've just accepted a role with Elevate Sports Venture as a project coordinator on their insights team.
Excellent. Thank you all for joining us today. So let's start with a dialogue round robin style, in which I'm going to ask a few questions. And Valerie, please, by all means, we'll probably ask for your insight from a more seasoned professional perspective. But let's start with everyone. If you could really quickly tell us about an instance where you broke or you cracked the glass ceiling and the challenges that you experienced at the intersection of gender, race, identity. Let's continue the conversation with Gabby. Keep going. Tell us about your experience.
For sure. I'm a little less, I guess, in depth on the industry side of things, but where I really would say I've started to break that glass ceiling or really have faced those barriers that I've started to pivot around. I didn't have the best experience in high school. I actually had to leave due to, at that point in time, I wasn't as confident with my sexuality where I am today, being now out and a little bit more confident. And I had a few internships during my undergrad years that at that point in time, Pride events weren't really occurring on an annual basis. Maybe they had one night that was for ticket sales for specific groups. It wasn't attending the festivals or the parades. And I didn't see myself necessarily fitting on the corporate private sector side. So I almost pushed myself to go more in that nonprofit corporate social responsibility area. And from doing this doctorate now and really learning things back on the end of what is being done to try and resolve those things. So people like myself, students hopefully in these positions today, don't go through those experiences. And what I've really just been doing is putting my voice and being intentional, kind of reiterating what Valerie was saying there. And those places that maybe I was silent in the past or thought that I didn't really maybe belong, have put myself forward and spoken with people who maybe before these past 2 years wouldn't have really thought about those issues. So yeah.
Similar question to you, Lorena, your experiences.
Yeah, well, definitely for me, I started a very traditional background with Hyatt as well. I thought Hyatt was just the holy grail of hospitality. And I decided, to switch it up. And I saw that there's an opportunity in the tech field with startups and hospitality. And when I first entered the world, it was very, honestly, it was a boys club. A lot of the individuals in leadership role were men in their early 20s, and if not late 20s. And even though I started in an opportunity of leadership, I had some self-doubt in myself, being an immigrant, first generation to go to college. I didn't really have anyone who did the things that I did, moved around to Hawaii, to New York. My mom was like, "Are you crazy? What are you doing? Stay in Philly." So I think for me, breaking the glass ceiling meant to understand my value as an individual and what I can bring to the table. And once I understood my value, I could come to interviews, I can come into the room with more confidence and more awareness as to how I can be a value to any company that I'm in. So that was a big deal for me, and really helped me understand that I can definitely move in the progression that I really wanted to take. And no man was gonna impair me from getting there either.
Confidence is key. Tell us a little bit about your story, Christine.
So for me, I believe like the glass ceiling looks different for all of us. And it's like dependent on like the environment we're in. So for me, that looked different when I was in Philadelphia as an Asian female international student versus today as a modern working woman in Asia. So I'll talk about like the latter. So as like a modern working woman in Asia, my glass ceiling are, factors such as like cultural expectations and traditional concepts of gender roles. So while some countries are, a little more progressive or becoming a little more progressive, it is still a very male dominant environment with traditional ideas of what a woman's role is in society. So if we're trying to tie this back into the sports or tourism industry, if you Google the Tokyo Olympics and their recent sexism controversy, you kind of get a glimpse of how Asian women are still viewed today in 2021, right? So for me, the first glass ceiling that I shattered was, getting my education, specifically my master's education. So back in 2016, when I was accepted into the master's program with STHM, I was met with, many questions from extended family, like, why are you doing more, why are you trying to get more schooling? How long is the program? I told them 2 years. Oh no, you need to find a husband, get married, and have kids. But in 2 years, I got my master's and not only became the first woman, but the first person in my family, both very big Asian family, to get not only my bachelor's, but my master's as well. And that's my power that I hold on to till today too. So even today, working as, working in Asia, I still fight against those societal prejudice or traditional gender roles, but I use it to my power.
And nobody can take that power away from you.
Nope.
Absolutely. All right, Kendra.
So my trajectory was a little bit different, as I ended up being in the hotel investment route, which is what I wanted, but it was a little bit harder to get there because usually, as was mentioned before, a lot of people in that world have mentors, which I didn't have because I didn't know anyone who ever did that before. So just for a little bit of stats, because I love these stats. So 1 in 22 women in the hotel industry space are hotel executives. And then in addition to that, in terms of hotel owners, less than 1% of hotel owners in the US are Black. So I am a Black woman. Multiplying those two fractions is a number so small I can't even do it in my head. And I'm a finance person, so it's a really small odd. So being in this space as a whole is breaking a glass ceiling, which is something that I shatter every day. Just being here and existing in this type of space. And the way that I show up in this space is by having built that confidence, being comfortable, being a disruptor in the room. I can completely walk into a room and people will not think that I'm on the investment side or think I have some other type of job. And I'm just like, nope, this is where I'm at. I'm supposed to be here, and knowing where I'm supposed to be. So that's how I'm able to continue on this journey, is like Lorena said, knowing my value and being confident every time I show up.
And you know what? That statistic is so revealing, and it speaks volumes as to why we're having this conversation right now, right? So I'm going to pose a question. I'm going to do a little bit of cherry picking, but I'm going to pose this next question to Lorena. Tell us a little bit about how you secured your role within your current position, and what do you need to help further your career and moving past that glass ceiling that you may have experienced?
Yeah, in my current position, I'm still in like the startup tourism hospitality world. And I've been in this space for the past 5 years at this point. And so what really helped me secure, it honestly goes back to the point of I really didn't, I didn't really think that I had a lot of opinions about things. I think because I took a traditional route where things were more corporate and more by the book. You don't really question it. You kind of just, they give you an SOP, you do it, and there you go. And being in this kind of startup world, you're kind of learning as you go. And it really helped me just gain more confidence in my voice and my opinions. And honestly, I feel like that had a big, just weighed heavily on my trajectory as to where I am today. I remember specifically in one of my positions, one of the marketing campaign that they use was a little bit just culturally, and it just didn't make sense. It seemed to me as a route that we shouldn't take as a company, basically because it didn't really highlight, our, our people of color in a really positive way. And so I put that to light to my leadership team and kind of express as, an Afro-Latina, like how that made me feel and why I would want to avoid our guests from seeing that type of image in any marketing campaign. And so, and they took it down and they immediately were like, oh my God, we didn't even think of it that way. I'm like, yeah, you should moving forward. So I think having those say and being open to letting people understand, like, I can bring this perspective to the table, that is really important as well. As I move forward in my career, I definitely would love to move in a trajectory where I'm, moving into a VP a role. And to be honest with you, the biggest piece that I need there, I just need to be humble when there's failures in my career and take into consideration, honestly, but I think I'm quoting Valerie, but take into consideration some of that criticism that you might receive throughout your journey, because that really builds strength in you as a leader, and really make sure that your feet are grounded with any decision that you make moving forward as well.
Excellent. And I'm going to ask this next question of Valerie, but then I'm going to ask for Kendra, Gabby, and Lorena to kind of follow up. What challenges do you, as a minority woman, experience when attempting to secure that senior leadership role within your industry? Or what challenges have you personally encountered when trying to secure that leadership role?
Well, remember I was at the, I don't even want to call it the before time, but I was at the time when they were really just abject racists. It was just in your face. And there were two instances that come to mind. One, I always lived the life of, you got 3 seconds to make people feel comfortable about who you are when you enter the room. And everyone has had this. When I look at the spectrum of people, it's like once they see you or once they know your sexual status, there's this opinion they have, and you got 3 seconds to get them off of that and just, judge me for who I am, judge me for my intellect. My very first position as general manager was, I was appointed to a property in Oak Brook, Illinois that was owned by McDonald's Corporation on their office campus. It was managed by Hyatt. It was called The Lodge. I absolutely loved that job. The asset manager for the hotel was a guy by the name of Fred Turner, who at that time was chairman of McDonald's Corporation. He absolutely started the company with Ray Kroc. And he just loved the idea that he had this little hotel and thought, oh, I'm just going to really lean into this and learn something. And so, he would just call me every other day with an idea or to pick my brain. And what he was actually doing, he thought he was learning. I was the one learning because I had access to this icon of industry. And he just wanted to have basic conversations about the business and pick my brain. And, our relationship grew, and it was about 6 months later, he called me into his cubicle. They had cubicles, and he said, I just want to let you know, I just think you're doing a great job. And for a young general manager, that was really important to hear, because you just like, I want to make sure every time I talk to Mr. Turner, everything is perfect. And, he would work so hard to try to calm me down. So this particular day, he calls me and he goes, I just want to let you know you're doing a great job, but I want to tell you something that happened. He said, I got a call from, your CEO, who stated, I have this great candidate. It's a woman and she's Black. And he said, so is she qualified? Yes. Why would you insult me by describing her? Mm-hmm. Now, this is in 1985. And I was completely shocked that he was even having a conversation like this with me. And he said, I almost tore up the contract, but I knew if I tore up the contract, you wouldn't get your shot. And you deserve to be here. We are appreciative of you being here. So I'm like, where does this guy come from? Like, how, we're trying to get people to think like that today.
Right.
And it was perplexing. And what I found out is, after another 6 months later, I met his family. His son-in-law was Black, his grandchildren were Black. And he said, I have been on a lifetime journey and I'm still on a journey. But I am a part of my Black family, and my Black family is a part of me. So I identify completely, and I don't want my grandchildren to grow up being labeled and judged by what they look like. That's how you were being judged, and I was insulted by that. So what I ended up finding out is, at the time, that's how they sort of introduced you. And if someone didn't want a Black general manager, you didn't get that job.
Interesting.
Today that doesn't happen, but we still don't have a lot of Black general managers, or a lot of Asian general managers, or a lot of South Asian general managers in an industry that is populated with people of color. So that still exists. And the only thing I can say is just be prepared and just knock yourself out to get through that door.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting, because we were talking about the 80s into the 2020s, the 2000s, and we're still lacking that representation.
That's right.
Gabby, how about you? What are the challenges that you think you experienced as a woman attempting to secure senior leadership roles?
Yeah, for sure. And this is definitely stemming off of just coming off of the job search. When you are naturally just these conversations of what diversity, equality, inclusion should be, I can't say that my experience is the same as somebody, obviously, who might be Black or Asian, because that's a physical attribute that you go through day in, day out. When you first meet me, my sexuality, who I am as a person, my background, you don't know that until after those 3 seconds, as we were just talking about earlier. So that privilege has always just been something that I've kept in my mind. But after this past summer, and when people are really starting to wake up definitely a little bit more of, the institutionalized problems, whether it's gender or race or transphobia or all these subjects. But if you're knowledgeable on these things from lived experiences, or in my kind of state, I'm studying them in my moment, you get siloed almost instantly by people who don't get it into, you should be doing diversity, equality, inclusion for our organization. And prior to George Floyd and this past summer, the Black Lives Matter movement, those people were not getting money. They were just there for a tokenistic gesture for a lot of organizations. And on the sports side in particular, I can probably show from evidence of screenshots of websites for organizations of generic statements to now actually having tangible things that people are putting out. But for me, it was really just people saying to me, here's this diversity, equality, inclusion. role that, maybe fit you particularly because that's your area. And where I see myself, what I'm doing hopefully in the future with Insights is I know that we need to know more about consumers than just your traditional sports fan of what it has been historically. I'm really excited to utilize the knowledge of this pandemic. We know women in particular were 4 times more likely to leave their roles. And what does that mean for disposable income for people? What does that mean for, single parents, whether women or men, and how do we, shape understanding what it looks like for all family backgrounds? So that was a challenge for me. And what I've really been, and this is probably actually from my research as well as my recommendations, where you can really, try and address these things and maybe put yourself in a position that you don't get, pigeonholed or siloed into something. Intentionally talk to people who aren't experts in what you're an expert in. So you might not be interested in finance. Kendra, that's at her area. But I know that I would probably sit there and learn so much from somebody on the sports side who maybe does the ticket revenues for an organization, and they will equally learn with me those conversations, and I can bring up points that they maybe haven't thought of in the past. But yeah, that's where I've faced the challenge. Now I've thankfully overcome it and looking to kind of continue, I guess, piloting it going forward.
But also the importance of those diverse voices that you're talking about there. Kendra, what about some of your experience here trying to make that climb?
Yeah, so one of the issues that happens across the board as well is that senior leadership and especially executive roles like president or those higher CEO titles, those types of job openings typically aren't fully marketed. They're typically internal hires or in-network hires based on someone's recommendation, which means that since it's not openly accessible, you had to have a relationship with the person broadcasting that job or the person hiring. Well, if you're a minority and with relationships, like Valerie said, you only get 3 seconds to make an impact on someone and they'll decide if they want a relationship with you or not. And people are naturally going to build relationships with people that they see themselves in because they feel like, oh, I can relate to them. This is easy. So because of that, a lot of women and minorities are going to automatically be excluded for even having the opportunity to have a relationship with someone like that, which automatically excludes them from knowing that there's this job opening that they could qualify for, but they just weren't able to make the connection with that person from no fault of their own. So I guess the way that we fix that is by starting to actively build relationships with people that aren't from the same backgrounds as us so that we can have more diverse networks, so that we can be more inclusive, especially when these executive roles start becoming available.
Absolutely. And Lorena, some of those challenges from your perspective.
Yeah, specifically with this question, I think is important to learn how to spot those opportunities. And I think if you have definitely the luxury to be within the interview process, I think being forward sometimes can be very drastic for some people. And by being forward, it's just sharing to whoever's interviewing you what your values are. And so if your value is to be in a workspace that there is open dialogue about diversity, about inclusion, and just see how they react to it, or their response to it, I think that will give you a lot of insight as well. But that's if you're in that opportunity. However, if you are in a space where you're looking into roles or companies, I am crazy on Google. I'll search about their history. I'll search about prior individuals in those roles. What have they transitioned to, or even their transition within the company, and looking at their current leadership board. I think that will give you a lot of insight. But I think doing your research, also just writing down as I transition in my career, what do I really want to look into a company, and then seeing within questions that you asked throughout the interview process or throughout the job search process, is the company answering those questions? And if not, that should already be triggering you to understand, okay, maybe they don't share the same values as I do. Let me continue to look for something that really kind of share that with me as well. for the question. Yeah.
I do want to continue this conversation. Oh, go
I
ahead,
just
Valerie.
add to that because I
Sure.
think, Lorena, you just said a mouthful there. You're spot on. You also need to be really careful about your trajectory and when they're promoting you. You know, there have been a lot of promotions of Black women, people of color in the worst of environments, in the worst of economic environments, and the first to fail. You didn't fail. You were put in a position that you couldn't win. And that's happened in many cases. And so it's so important to just know, look, is this the right job at the right time? Because a lot of companies, they can absorb that loss because they know they're going to lose anyway. And then, okay, well, see, I did my part, and then replace that with the person they're most comfortable with. We've seen that happen in a number of situations with major companies, and there have been, in some cases, some pretty devastating consequences as a result. So, you know, make sure that you've got all eyes open when you take on these positions, because sometimes, you know, it could be, I had a gentleman say it to me yesterday, we're looking for a senior leader, and he goes, is this a setup? I'm like, no, you can do this job. You know, you really can do this job. This is not a setup. But it's something that, you know, our seasoned leaders of color think about. And it is something I would say is not too far off the beaten path. So, you know, be ready, but ask those questions. I mean, Lorena, you're so right. It's not just about window dressing, but are you a company with a sustainable mission attached to diversity?
Excellent. And as we talk about some of these impacts, I want to now kind of shift the conversation a little bit. And Christine, I'm going to ask this question of you because you talked about your role within Cambodia. How has the pandemic worsened, and from your perspective, some of these disparities?
So when I actually think about this question, I can't help but think about the international community at Temple, especially when I was following along the news of how the pandemic was affecting Philly or the US. It immediately made me think about the international community because, like right now, as we're approaching April 1st, there are a lot of international students that are about to apply for their OPT visa, or their work visas, or alums who are currently working who are applying for another type of visa. So I know, like last summer, there was a big panic when an executive order was signed to suspend these work visas. So, you know, for this all said and kinds is creates a panic within the students, because it's like, oh, what's my legal status now here in America? Do I stay or do I go back to my home country? So, you know, there was just a lot of uncertainties, and especially for students now who are looking for jobs, I'll be honest, it's tough right now. On top of having to explain that you need a work visa, that kind of adds like a additional layer. So I'm not sure if there's any international students on this Zoom call right now, but I do want to give you guys words of encouragement. Whatever jobs that you guys are trying to apply to in America right now, this advice was given to me when I was applying for jobs in Philly, was that any opportunity that you want to approach, make sure you see it through to the very end. So if there's a job opportunity that you really want, but you know, you're kind of worried about, oh, but I need a visa or I need a sponsorship, approach them and start that conversation with them. Explain to them that what you need, and you know, give them the tools and resources and the solutions on how you and the company together can solve that and work through it. Don't make it seem like a big hurdle, because if they really want you, just know that you're the most qualified person for that job, and don't let that stop you. So that was a great advice that was given to me by my mentor at that time, and I went in and had that conversation, and it wasn't intimidating because once you explain the steps to them, then they're like, hey, we just have to do these paperwork, but hey, in return, we get this very qualified person. So I just really want to encourage like the international students that are going to be applying for it. And it's going to be tough. It's a tough road. I've been on both sides applying for the OPT and then also for the H-1B visa as well. But no matter what, if it doesn't work out, just know that, any rejection that you might face might just be a redirection for your life. So again, I know this pandemic definitely adds an additional layer on all of this, especially for the job search and the visas and all that, but just, power through it.
Christine, you talked about the effort basically outweighing, or I should reverse that, the value outweighing the effort that companies and employers have to put in helping to sponsor international students. So as you talk through also the mentorship that you received, can you talk a little bit more about how now you, and I think Valerie spoke to this earlier, but now how you inspire and support women within your organization, and how can someone become a better advocate or sponsor for someone else who's looking to shatter the glass ceiling? Yeah,
absolutely. So within my company right now, last year I created a management trainee program because we saw that a lot of the recruits that we were getting in, they weren't, they still needed a lot of grooming. So this was like a perfect opportunity for us to take fresh graduates, especially young women, into these roles, and to we typically in the executive role, we require 1 to 2 years of experience, but within this management trainee program, you give them that kind of experience within the 6 months period. And during that time, we as the managers mentor these management trainees throughout the process and giving them the tools that they need to succeed. And it's very important, especially for these young women, to see women like myself in managerial position, because on day one, I tell them, I hope that you guys take everything that we teach you and you come after my job. Like, I want you guys to, see yourself in me. I want you guys to aim for that managerial position or that director position or CEO, right? Because again, with the traditional gender roles, women don't typically work after a certain, especially here in Cambodia, after a certain age, they're kind of expected to be housewives. So to really show them that whatever you want to achieve, if you want that managerial position or director position, go after it. And I also find that it's also important to start mentoring at a younger age too. So I'm also involved with the middle school, high school that I attended here, and to start just having those conversations with these young girls, to start planting seeds to let them know that whatever they want to do, they can go after it, and to really, if they want that education, to go for it, and not to kind of be trapped in that traditional route of what they're expected to be here in our society.
I like that term, trapped in tradition.
Yeah.
You know what, Kendra, I'm going to ask this question of you, and we'll wrap up the dialogue here and get some final thoughts from Valerie. But similar question, how do you inspire and support women in your company as peers or even colleagues? And how can someone become an advocate or a sponsor for someone else to help them shatter a glass ceiling?
Sure. So taking the first part of what I'm doing, that is a lot of what Elise Capital's mission is as a whole, not just for those we work with, but for everyone in closing that wealth gap. So the wealth gap in the US today, whether it be the gender wealth gap or the racial wealth gap, is setting up a lot of people to not be able to reach their full potential because of financial constraints. So what Elise Capital does is we help open the door and make people realize that there are opportunities for us to generate wealth and continue to receive financial freedom, so that we can be all that we're purposed to be, all that we have the potential to be, and don't have to have those sorts of setbacks and kind of catch up with everyone else in the country, really. So that is how we're supporting. But other ways that people can be a sponsor or an advocate for someone else is by showing up and speaking up for them. So it's, again, back to those relationship-based of making a recommendation on someone's behalf, plugging people in. Hey, did you know that this opportunity is available? I can connect you with the person. And being that connector is the same way that you open a door for someone else, because you need the bridge in order to get to the opportunity. So someone on the other side of the river has to send the flag up. Hey, come over here. We're good. We have space for you.
Kendra, you said another key thing that I like. You need the bridge in order to get to the opportunity. Excellent. So thank you, ladies. Let's wrap up this dialogue with Valerie. Valerie, any final thoughts, any last insights that you want to share with our participants, with our alumni panel, as they continue to break molds and shatter glass ceilings? Oops, you're muted, Valerie. And you look like you're saying something good too.
I'm going to quote Amanda Gorman from that wonderful poem that she gave during the inauguration. While we have our eyes on the future, history has their eyes on us. Keep that at the forefront of your mind. It will direct your behavior. It will direct your ability to not only develop and grow your own career, but those that are around you, those that are right behind you. I love, Kendra, the sentiment that you just expressed. It is, it's vital. Know your history, know why we're here, where we're at. It's not a kind history, but let's not repeat it. Let's make sure we are bringing people up with us and making sure they're leaving that lasting story, that when history looks back on us, history looks back on us with a smile.
Excellent. Thank you all. This has been a wonderful and dynamic conversation. Your insights, your contributions to this discussion have been invaluable. We put a little survey in the chat. So for our participants, go ahead and access that chat and let us know what you thought about us having this candid conversation. Thank you so much, Valerie, Christine, Kendra, Lorena, Gabby. We can't say thank you enough. Matter of fact, I'm just going to end it here and say, you all please join us again for another version of Diversity Speaks when we have our next iteration next month, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much, folks. Bye.